for a possible multi-front conflict, even as it continues its crackdown on Hamas and its allies. The U.S. is hoping for a slowdown in the invasion on the Gaza Strip, but Israel seems to be prepared for the long haul. Within days of pledging rock-solid and unwavering support for Israel, Washington is pressing Israel now to delay its ground invasion against Gaza, to allow negotiations for the release of American hostages and humanitarian aid to flow into the Gaza Strip. Following talks with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, U.S. President Joe Biden met leaders of France, Britain, Germany, Italy, as well as Canada, who welcomed the release of 2 hostages by Hamas. Their joint statement called for the immediate release of all hostages. The United States considers the release of hostages a priority. Hamas, on the other hand, has alleged that Israel is not serious about negotiating the release of hostages. It even claimed that Israel had declined to receive 2 more hostages that they were willing to release on quote-unquote humanitarian grounds. Israel dismissed the Hamas statement as being sheer propaganda while holding firm on its resolve to launch a ground offensive. It went ahead with overnight strikes on Sunday that killed scores of Palestinians. The Palestinian Health Ministry reported 13 deaths in the Israeli raid. At least 81 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since the conflict began. Israel claimed that dozens of Hamas terrorists have been killed in its overnight raid on the Gaza Strip. Hamas said at least 55 people were killed in the raids. More than 35,000 Palestinian refugees are now taking shelter at a tent camp in Khan Yunis, city of southern Gaza. According to a UNICEF official, 1 million children in Gaza need urgent protection. But the question which remains is, how long will the war between Israel and Hamas continue? According to Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, Israel's upcoming ground offensive in the Gaza Strip could last up to 3 months. But he stressed that it would be the last one and that Hamas would be wiped out. All right, for more on this, our correspondent Jody Cohen has sent us this report.
So I've been on the scene of a live security situation here in Ra'anana, with a shopping centre behind me having a bomb scare. Now, this comes amid yesterday on Sunday, 15 pounds of explosives were found in a child's backpack that the army said was left by Hamas, and there have been security alerts across Israel. Now, this comes amid the backdrop of thousands of Hamas terrorists infiltrating into Israel just over 2 weeks ago. The IDF also are said to be preparing for a ground offensive on the Gaza border, and we know that there are also troops in the north ready to defend against Hezbollah in Lebanon should they escalate further. Now, much like the Gazan civilians have been warned to move from North Gaza to the south of Gaza to get to safety, Israeli communities have also been evacuated on the northern border and on the southern border as well. And people are on alert here across the country.
We are now being joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis from Virginia. He is a military expert and senior fellow for defense priorities. He's also the host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on WION this morning. We reported as early as Friday that it seems the United States is trying to negotiate with the Israelis to slow down this ground offensive in hope of releasing more hostages. However, Israel has been firm in saying that they're preparing for the long haul. What do you make of these comments and how the United States is prioritizing?
Well, look, I don't think the United States is going to be the only entity that's arguing for a slowdown in the ground invasion. I bet the families of every single one of the Israeli hostages are saying the same thing to the government. I actually know that that's the case. And you can certainly understand why, because if the IDF goes in heavy and they literally just start, annihilating everything in front of them on the ground, which any ground incursion is going to likely do, then the chances of those hostages being killed is very high. So, of course, the family members are saying, hey, don't rush into this. Let's make sure we get our, family members back. Let's try to get some hostages negotiated and returned before you go in and do any of that kind of sting. And of course, I think that it was a very tactical move on Hamas's part to let that one mother-daughter American pair be released, because that gave hope to all the rest of them. And I'm sure that their intent partially was, and maybe even wholly, was to put pressure on the Israeli government not to go in with their attack, so that people would say, look, if you just hold on, maybe more will come. So I'm sure that that was the purpose of it. And in fact, that's why Hamas took so many hostages and no doubt has them scattered throughout the Gaza Strip where they can't be found or make it very difficult to be found, because they want to slow down that incursion. And if Israel goes ahead and goes through with it, then, of course, they'll be probably, being this brutal as they are, they'll probably show video that says, look, the hostages were killed by the Israeli Defense Forces. So it is a huge risk for Israel, and it's an excruciating challenge for them to have to figure out, how do we, protect the hostages? How do we take care of people, but also go in and conduct this operation and not suffer this big humanitarian problem and a problem to maintain the global support that they have across much of the West, in that if they go in and are seen to not care about either the Palestinians or their own hostages, they could lose support abroad, and that could be crucial for Israel.
Lieutenant Colonel, judging from your experience, and who better to ask than yourself, in situations like this where you're dealing with terror on the one hand and trying to deliver humanitarian aid to innocent civilians on the other, how do you balance something like that, considering the fact that, Hamas is spread out between the civilian population and it's at times very difficult to make sure that even this aid is getting to the civilians?
Yeah, look, there's one thing that we have to understand right from the beginning, and what I just said about the difficult for the military operation is applicable as well. This is a horrible situation. There are no good answers. There are no good options. It's just, which of the bad options are you going to choose? Because Israel is faced in this particular case with, do we let in a large amount of food supplies and relief supplies so that these millions of Palestinian innocent civilians don't starve to death or die of thirst or get sick with diphtheria and who knows what all other kind of diseases because they have lost running water? Or do they risk giving them this stuff and then it being diverted to maintain the Hamas fighters whom they want to weaken? And the problem is, there's no solution to it. You're either going to say no supplies are going to go in and the people are going to starve along with the Hamas fighters, or you're going to let food in so that the civilians are able to maintain, they are able to live. But for sure that some of that aid is going to be diverted to Hamas. There's no possibility, there's no mechanism to prevent it from going to Hamas. So unfortunately, I think that's just the cost of doing business. I think Israel's just going to have to understand that some of the food will go to their enemies, but if that's the cost to keeping innocent civilians alive, it's a price they're going to have to pay, I'm afraid.